Rain poured hard over the quiet streets of Mombasa, each drop hitting the windshield like a drumbeat to my escape. I sat behind the wheel of a small rusted car, the only thing I could call home now. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from everything I had just left behind. My stepfather's shouting still echoed in my head, the sting of his hand still fresh on my skin. He always made me feel small, unwanted, like I was nothing but a mistake. My mother never stopped him. Sometimes she looked away. Sometimes she even agreed with him. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a small duffel bag, stuffed in some clothes, a bottle of water, and the little money I had saved. The sound of my heart was louder than the storm as I turned the key in the ignition. The road stretched out like a dark river ahead of me. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I wanted was peace. The rain blurred the lights around me until the whole world looked like tears. I parked under a streetlight near the docks, watching the sea waves crash against the rocks. It was the first time in years I felt free, even if freedom meant hunger, fear, and loneliness. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "You're safe now." It wasn't true yet, but it would be. Days passed slowly, one blending into another until I lost count. The car had become my world, a small metal box that held my fear, hunger, and silence. Every night, I parked near the docks where I could hear the waves crash against the rocks. The ocean had a strange way of comforting me. Its sound was wild and endless, like freedom itself. I ate little, mostly dry crackers I kept in a plastic bag and sipped bottled water to trick my stomach into thinking it was full. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine warm food, a real bed, someone asking if I was okay. But when I opened them, it was just me, the sea, and the cold night air creeping in through the cracked window. I would talk to myself sometimes, whispering stories to stay sane. "You're strong," I'd say softly. "You've survived worse." But the truth was, I was scared, terrified of being found, and just as scared of being forgotten. The days were hot and the nights were freezing. I would wrap myself in an old jacket, listening to the sound of footsteps echoing from the docks, hoping none of them would come too close. The fishermen would arrive early in the morning, shouting to each other as they prepared their boats. I'd hide, afraid they'd ask questions, afraid they'd recognize me. Then one morning, as the sun began to rise and the sky turned pink, I saw a familiar car slowly driving down the street. My heart stopped. It was my stepfather's. Even from a distance, I knew that old black Toyota. My chest tightened, and my hands began to shake so badly that the cracker I was holding fell to the floor. I didn't think, I just reacted. I slid down the seat and ducked under the dashboard, pulling my knees to my chest. My breathing was so loud it felt like the whole world could hear it. The car slowed near mine, its engine humming like a threat. I could almost see his face, that same cold, angry look he always had when he was about to hit me. I closed my eyes and begged silently, "Please don't see me, please just go." Seconds felt like hours. The sound of his tires rolled past, then faded away. I didn't move. I stayed hidden, shaking, until I was sure he was gone. When I finally sat up, the world outside looked blurry through my tears. I felt like I had just escaped death. That morning, I realized something important: I was invisible only until someone wanted to find me. And when they did, I had to be ready. The sea roared beside me, loud and endless, reminding me that freedom was never easy. I looked out at the horizon, my stomach growling, my heart still racing, and whispered to the wind, "Not today. You won't catch me today." That night, the rain came down harder than ever. Thunder rolled through the sky like a drumbeat, and flashes of lightning lit up the car where I sat, curled under a thin blanket. I hadn't eaten properly in days. The sound of the sea nearby was both a comfort and a curse. It kept me company, but it also reminded me how small and lost I was in the world. I stared out the foggy window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. My stomach ached, and my eyes burned from crying. I kept telling myself I'd be fine, that this was better than living in fear. But that night, even freedom felt heavy. Then, out of nowhere, came a soft tap on the window. My heart jumped. Once. Twice. Then again. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed one name, my stepfather. Maybe he had found me. Maybe this was it. My hands trembled as I wiped the glass with my sleeve, trying to see through the blur of rain and darkness. Lightning flashed, and for a second I saw a face. But it wasn't his. It was someone else, someone I hadn't seen in years. It was Uncle Stepfather, my late father's brother. He was standing there in the storm, holding an umbrella that did little to protect him from the pouring rain. His shirt was soaked, his face pale with worry. When our eyes met, his expression broke me. It was a mix of anger, pain, and deep sadness. He tapped again, softer this time. I slowly unlocked the door, and he leaned down, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where you've been," he said, his voice shaking. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just looked at me, his jaw tight as if he was holding back both words and tears. Then, without another question, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. He placed them gently in my lap. "Not anymore," he said quietly, his voice firm but kind. I stared at the keys, confused. "Uncle," I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He shook his head. "No more sleeping in cars. No more running. You're coming with me." I wanted to argue, to say I didn't deserve help, that I was fine, but I wasn't. I was tired, scared, and broken. So when he opened the passenger door and held out his hand, I took it. As I stepped out of the car, the rain hit my face, cold and sharp, like a reminder that I was still alive. My uncle wrapped his jacket around my shoulders, guiding me toward his car. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. As we drove away, I looked back at the old rusted car disappearing into the night. That was where I had hidden from the world. But now, maybe, it was time to start living again. The drive that night felt endless. The rain still fell, but softer now, almost like it had grown tired. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the streets of Mombasa blurred by. My uncle didn't say much, and neither did I. Every now and then, he would glance at me, his jaw tightening like he was trying to keep his emotions under control. I was too exhausted to ask where we were going. All I knew was that I finally felt safe, even if I didn't understand why. After a while, the city lights faded, replaced by tall trees and wide, empty roads. The air smelled different here, cleaner, calmer. When the car finally stopped, I looked up and froze. In front of us stood tall black gates, shining even in the dim light. Beyond them, I could see the outline of a massive house, almost like a palace. My uncle turned to me and said softly, "Your father built this place." I thought I had misheard him. "My father?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes. This is your home. Your stepfather kept you from everything that was rightfully yours." I couldn't speak. My mind raced back to the small, broken house where I grew up, to the nights I went to bed hungry, to the clothes that never fit right. And now, here I was, standing before gates that led to a mansion built by the man I barely remembered. The guard at the entrance opened the gates as soon as he saw my uncle, and we drove through. The car rolled down a long driveway lined with palm trees and soft lights that looked like stars on the ground. When we finally stopped in front of the house, I stepped out and just stared. The mansion was breathtaking, white walls that gleamed even in the night, tall glass windows, and a grand staircase that led to a door big enough for giants. My heart pounded as I followed my uncle inside. The moment I stepped through the door, my shoes squeaked against the shiny marble floor. Chandeliers sparkled above me, and the smell of polished wood and roses filled the air. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the luxury I had never known existed. My uncle watched me quietly. "You should have grown up here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your father wanted you to have everything. But they took it all away from you." His words hit me harder than I expected. I ran my hand along the cold marble wall, feeling both angry and sad. All those years of pain, of hiding, of thinking I had nothing, when in truth, I had everything stolen from me. Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of disbelief, of change. I turned to my uncle and whispered, "I can't believe this is mine." He smiled faintly and said, "Believe it. You're home now." And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. I didn't have to hide anymore. The next morning, sunlight poured into my new room, soft and golden. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. The clean sheets, the warm bed, the sound of birds instead of shouting, it all felt unreal. Then I remembered everything, the car, the rain, my uncle finding me, and this mansion that was somehow mine. My heart felt heavy and grateful at the same time. When I walked downstairs, I found Uncle Sephew sitting in the living room with a serious look on his face. A large brown folder rested on the coffee table in front of him. He looked up and said, "Sit down. There's something you need to see." I sat beside him, unsure of what to expect. He opened the folder slowly, revealing several old papers and stamped documents. "This," he said, tapping the first page, "is your father's will." I leaned forward, staring at the neat handwriting and the official seals. My father's name was right there, bold and clear. My throat tightened as Sephew continued. "Before your father died, he left everything to you, his business, his savings, the properties. All of it." For a few seconds, I didn't understand. I blinked, reading the words again and again, as if they would change. Then the truth began to sink in. I had spent my whole life being treated like I was nothing, when all along, I had been the rightful owner of everything they had. My chest felt like it was on fire. "But, how?" I whispered. Sephew's eyes darkened. "Your mother and stepfather forged new papers," he said quietly. "They changed the names, the signatures, everything. They made it look like they owned it all." He handed me another paper, one that looked almost the same as the original, except for a fake signature that was supposed to be my father's. My hands began to shake. I could still remember my stepfather laughing when I asked why we never had enough money. I remembered my mother telling me my father left us with nothing. All those years, they had lied. Tears blurred my vision as I traced my father's real signature with my fingers. It felt like he was reaching out to me through the paper, like he had never really left. "They stole your life," Sephew said softly, his voice heavy with anger and sadness. "But now it's time to take it back." I sat there in silence, my heart racing. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. My own mother had been part of this. My stepfather had built his pride, his power, his whole life on something that was never his. I looked at Sephew, his eyes full of quiet strength. "What do I do now?" I asked. He smiled faintly and said, "We start by getting back what's yours." That moment changed everything. I wasn't just the girl who ran away anymore. I was the girl who had something worth fighting for. And this time, I wasn't running. I was coming back for everything they took. The day I went back to my old neighborhood, the sun was bright but the air felt heavy. It had been months since I last saw that place, but the memories still lived there, the shouting, the fear, the nights I cried myself to sleep. As the car rolled past the same broken fences and dusty streets, my heart pounded harder. I wasn't the scared girl who once ran away. I was someone different now. Dressed simply in jeans and a white shirt, I didn't need luxury to show my strength. I had something much more powerful, the truth. When I stepped out of the car, a few neighbors turned to stare. I could feel their eyes on me, whispering, wondering if it was really me, the girl who vanished one night and never came back. I smiled politely and walked straight to the old house that used to be my prison. The paint was peeling, the gate still broken, and the same smell of damp wood filled the air. It felt strange standing there, knowing that everything had changed, except this place. My stepfather came out when he heard the car door close. His face was just as I remembered, cold, sharp, full of pride. He looked me up and down with disgust and gave a short, bitter laugh. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said. "The ungrateful little girl who thought she could survive without me." His words didn't hurt like they used to. I met his eyes and said calmly, "I didn't just survive. I lived." He frowned, stepping closer. "You think you're something now? You're still nothing. Everything you see here, everything you left behind, it's mine." His voice was full of arrogance, like always. But this time, I didn't flinch. I opened my bag, pulled out a brown envelope, and handed it to him. "Read it," I said simply. He looked confused at first, then ripped it open and pulled out the papers. His eyes scanned the top page, and his smirk slowly disappeared. His hands began to shake. The seal from the court shone under the sunlight. The documents clearly stated that all his businesses, properties, and accounts now legally belonged to me, the rightful heir of my father's estate. He blinked, trying to process what he was reading. "This is a lie," he shouted, but his voice cracked halfway through. I stayed calm. "No," I said softly, "the lie was yours. This is the truth." My mother appeared at the door, her face pale and unreadable. For a second, I saw guilt flash in her eyes, then fear. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, clutching the doorframe, watching everything fall apart. My stepfather's voice grew quieter, almost desperate now. "You can't do this." I met his gaze and said, "It's already done." As I turned to leave, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The same streets that once saw me run away were now seeing me walk tall. I had come full circle. I wasn't there for revenge, I was there for closure. And as I walked back to my car, I whispered to myself, the past doesn't own me anymore. I own it. That night, I parked the car by the same dock where I once hid, hungry and scared, listening to the sea. The air was quiet except for the soft sound of the waves hitting the rocks. It felt strange sitting there again, in the same seat that used to be my bed, but this time my heart was calm. I didn't need to hide anymore. I was there to remember, to remind myself how far I had come. The smell of the ocean, the flickering streetlight, even the cracks on the steering wheel, they were all pieces of my past, pieces that had once broken me but now made me stronger. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw the girl I used to be, the one who ran away in the middle of the night, scared, tired, and lost. I could almost hear her whispering in the dark, asking if she'd ever be okay. I wanted to reach through time and tell her, "You will. One day you'll look back and smile." I opened my bag and pulled out 2 sets of keys, one silver, one gold. They clinked softly in my hand. My uncle had given them to me weeks ago, the day everything changed. "One is for the house," he'd said with a proud smile, "and the other is for your future." I hadn't really understood what he meant back then. But now, sitting there under the same streetlight that once watched me cry, I did. The silver key belonged to the mansion, my home. The gold one belonged to something even greater, my father's old company. My uncle had helped me reopen it, putting me in charge just like my father had planned before he died. The company that once built half of Mombasa's buildings was mine now. I had spent the last few weeks learning, listening, and rebuilding what my stepfather had tried to destroy. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was leading, growing, becoming the person my father always believed I could be. I held the gold key tightly in my hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't just metal, it was a promise. A promise that I would never let my past define me again. That I would use everything I'd learned, every pain I'd endured, to build something better. The wind blew gently through the open window, carrying the salty scent of the sea. I smiled through the tears that had quietly started to fall. Looking out at the ocean, I whispered softly, "I made it, Dad." The words came out shaky but full of truth. I knew somewhere, somehow, he was proud. The same girl who once cried herself to sleep in this car was now holding the keys to her own future. I wiped my face, turned on the engine, and watched the headlights reflect off the waves. This time, when I drove away, it wasn't to escape, it was to begin again. Months passed, and life changed in ways I never imagined. My stepfather's empire began to fall apart piece by piece, the same way he once tried to break me. His lies caught up with him, his businesses collapsed, and the people who once feared him turned their backs. The world that he had built on stolen money and cruelty finally came crashing down. Meanwhile, I stood taller than ever, not out of revenge, but because I had finally found peace. The same people who once looked at me with pity now came to my office asking for jobs, respect in their voices where there used to be whispers. I didn't gloat or boast. I just smiled and offered them a chance, because I knew what it felt like to have nothing. My uncle, who had stood by me from the night he found me in that car, became my business partner. Together, we rebuilt my father's company and turned it into something that helped others. The mansion that once felt too big for me slowly became a home, not just for me, but for many others. I opened part of it as a shelter for young girls who had run away from abuse, girls who needed safety, love, and hope. Every time one of them smiled or laughed again, I saw a little bit of my younger self in them, and it healed something inside me. At night, I would stand on the balcony, staring at the stars and listening to the distant sound of the sea. It always brought back memories of the nights I spent crying in that rusted car, scared and alone. But now, those memories no longer hurt, they reminded me of how far I'd come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, leading, and finally free. This wasn't pain anymore. This was victory.